warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you so much for joining me again in one of these videos of the journey that we're taking to get to know Qatari culture and tradition throughout the pages of its literature. Today, we have a very special guest because he's not only a PhD doctor, but also he's an author, he translates, he's also an academic teacher, and so many other things that he will tell us about today. And I hope that at the end of this video, you will get very inspired by him. He's Dr. Khalifa Al Hassan. And thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So, Dr. Khalifa, first I will make you some questions so that people can get a little bit engaged with your preferences in literature and how do you are and what do you do. So, which would you say is your favorite book?
Okay, so usually my way of looking into literature is starting from the beginning to the end. يعني I always like to go deep into the root of literature. So it wouldn't be a surprise that the best book that I enjoyed in my life is one of the books that are considered the first novels ever, the Don Quixote de la Mancha.
Don Quixote de la Mancha. Wow. And your pronunciation in Spanish is perfect, let me say.
That's the only one I can pronounce. Sorry.
So, who would you say is your favorite author?
Of course, Miguel de Cervantes.
Okay.
But you know, my one concern with Miguel de Cervantes is that I've only read Don Quixote by him.
Okay.
But I think I enjoy Victor Hugo, the French author who wrote the book Les Miserables, the Miserables.
Yeah.
Because you know I read a couple or more than a couple of books by him. His style, his way of translating misery into paper, into as they say black and white, ink on paper, is unbelievable. I don't think anybody else was able to, how can I say, squeeze misery into paper. Yeah.
And now you mentioned ink on paper. Being in 2022, I want to ask you, how do you prefer to read today, in a tablet or in a book?
Ink on paper.
Ink
In a
on
book.
paper.
In a book.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, going to your professional life, and I am very sure that the people that are watching will be very interested. You studied in Colombia in the US.
Columbia, Missouri, not the University of Columbia in New York.
Yeah.
I got my PhD from Columbia, Missouri.
Yes, yes, yes. Your PhD, but you did everything, right?
Yeah.
You studied there, also bachelor's. You have to.
My bachelor's was in Columbia, Missouri. Then I decided to go somewhere else, and I studied in Canada, Montreal.
Okay.
I did my master in Miguel, and it was in something called combinatorial algebra. Then I decided to switch gear, both in my professional, how can I say, specialization in mathematics. I decided to go to functional analysis, functional / harmonic analysis, and I decided to go back to Missouri because Columbia, Missouri is what we call a one-horse city.
Okay.
It's a city that has maybe 3 cows, 10 people, and 1 horse.
Okay.
And it was, you feel, how can I say, you feel at home.
At
over
home,
there.
yeah. Everybody knows each other.
Exactly. As opposed to Montreal, which is a very huge city with a beautiful downtown. Still, I love Montreal more than I love Missouri, but it is what it is.
So
Yeah.
you were outside for a long time. You were outside of Qatar for a long time.
12
How
years.
how was coming back to Qatar?
It was, I didn't have any trouble. There was no culture shock. Actually, the culture shock was when I went to the US.
When you read?
When I returned, it was fine. I was able to ease. Why? Because I'm an academician.
Yeah.
I've spent 12 years in a university, and when I worked in a university. There is seamless transition, really. You just need to switch gear, and instead of studying, you need to teach.
Yes.
That's the only maybe culture shock that I got.
And do you enjoy teaching?
I do. It has, how can I say, it's a little repetitive because you might be teaching the same course on and on and on, but
Yeah.
the more you teach a course, the more you learn it.
Okay.
Yeah.
The-
But
the-
yeah, I do enjoy it to some extent. I haven't been teaching Since I've been an admin, I haven't been teaching much, but I'm looking forward to increase my teaching, dose.
And can you tell us a bit about your journey? So you started your PhD, and then you came here. And where did you started working? How did you decided to enter there?
Well, I was, how can I say, I was on a scholarship by Qatar University. So actually, my affiliation with Qatar University was since I was 22 years old, after I got my bachelor's degree. And then when I returned to my home. I already know Qatar University very well. I had spent 7 years, away from it. But it's my home. I used to come here and teach for 1 year and then go back and so on and so forth. There is not much, how can I say, shock over there. Yeah.
The person that you're watching here, Dr. Khalifa, not only he's a very young man with a PhD, but also during all this time with the master, with the bachelor and the PhD, he even got time to write. So can you tell us, please, how did you decided to write? How did it started?
It's a funny story.
How did you have time to write?
It's a funny story. Most of the writing that I did, most of the publication I did, was during writing my thesis. It
Okay.
was my way of going away from writing the thesis. Procrastination. So that's exactly what's happening. If you don't mind, I would like to promote the books that I've written.
Please, please.
The first book that I've written was the first book that I've translated was, the jumping, notorious jumping frog of Calaveras County. It's a very difficult name to remember.
Okay.
And I've translated it maybe more than 10 years ago. It took me a good 2 or 3 years when I was in Qatar to write it, to translate it, because it was translation of Mark Twain. Mark Twain isn't an easy author to translate. First of all, his English is not easy. His English comes from 1890 or something on thereabout. Second of all, the tradition of the books, you need to understand that these people didn't have airplanes. So if he says I flew to Missouri, or if I flew to somewhere else, it didn't mean that he flew on an airplane. You need to understand that it meant he was running over there. The funny thing is, Mark Twain was born in Hannibal, Missouri, very near to Columbia, Missouri, where I studied.
Yeah.
I didn't know that back in the day, but it's fate, I believe. The one thing that I loved about Mark Twain, and I'm sure many of people of my age will remember some of the books that he has written. We all know Tom Sawyer. We all know, maybe not all of us would know Huckleberry Finn, but Ernest Hemingway, and he was one of the people who got Nobel Prize, praised Huckleberry Finn, saying that it is the pinnacle of American literature.
Really?
There is nothing that beats Huckleberry Finn. The funny thing is, Huckleberry Finn was not written in English, in common English. It was written in colloquial, black, dialect of Missouri. It requires a little bit of squinting your eyes and squinting your imagination to understand what lies in it. Tom Sawyer was written in standard English. Anybody can read it. It is taught in high schools and maybe prep schools and whatnot. His prose is not easy. The guy was a journalist. He wrote every day. He would have pieces every now and then. He was a magnificent and a gigantic writer. And he was, the thing that attracted me to his style was sarcasm.
Okay.
He was sarcastic, into satire. He would write strange, pieces. Some of his pieces were very melancholy. Since he had a very troubled life, his wife died, and his daughter died in the same year. And they say that in one occasion, most of his family, other than his wife and daughters, were on a ship, and the ship, how can I say, burst in flames.
Oh wow.
Everybody died, and they say his hair was black before. After that moment, it turned all white. If you go check his picture, you'll find him always with white hair.
Okay.
I don't know whether this is a legend or not. I used it in you know, the introduction and the preface of my first book. And when I say the first book, I mean because, you know, his what there is a difficulty into translating all of Mark Twain. Mark Twain has too much literature.
Yes, of course.
So I needed, you know, to focus my attention on something. For instance, you know, short works, and this is the difference between Arabic and English. Whatever, you know, is written there is called short story. For me, I wouldn't be calling it short story. Some of the material that I've translated could be considered a novella. Right now, I'm trying to publish the second portion. The first portion was, let me try to remember it again, The Notorious Jumping Frog of Calaveras County. It's about a frog, if you haven't noticed.
Yeah.
And that one story is considered a folk story. There is no folk tale in America. This is the nearest thing to a folk tale ever.
Okay.
And so he has, you know, a huge amount of short stories. I wasn't able to do it all in one shot, and I think that was a clever idea because it took me 2 years to finish the first part, and now it took me 10 years to finish the second part.
Really?
Not because it's hard, but because of my duties and being lazy mostly.
No, I don't think so.
I need, you know, hopefully, before I die, I finish the third portion. Aside from Mark Twain, who I think you can see that I love, whose literature I like very much, I have switched gear to a writer called Edogawa Rampo.
Okay.
If you squint your eyes and squint your ears and say Edogawa Rampo 10 times, can you try? Say, Edogawa Rampo, Edogawa Rampo, Edogawa Rampo, Edogawa. Would you hear Edgar Allan Poe?
Okay.
He played this Japanese writer. His name is Hirai
Okay.
Hirai Taro. I'm sorry.
Okay.
He was one of the pioneers of police story, Japanese. Roman policier, they say it in French, and we don't have any equivalent in English. There is no roman policier in English. They call it mystery.
Okay.
You see what I'm saying? When you say roman policier, you mean a story about police, something like detectives, like you know, Sherlock Holmes, Hercule Poirot, and the like.
Yes.
Okay. The genre doesn't have a name in English. It's mostly labeled as mystery, but mystery is a bigger genre than roman policier or police stories, or detective stories, they might be calling it. He was a pioneer in that arena, and he was influenced by Edgar Allan Poe. Before Hirai Taro or Edogawa Rampo, not Edgar Allan Poe, every type of literature in Japanese was read through newspapers. You wanted to read Charles Dickens, you'll find it serialized in a Japanese paper.
Okay.
You want to read some stories of Macabre. Macabre is the way that Edgar Allan Poe, the American poet, writes. He writes stories that that are creepy. They make you can't sleep. You know what I'm saying? So Edogawa Rampo, the Japanese counterpart, found all these stories, and he was very attached to them, in the sense that he started writing, you know, these types of stories. I love this this genre. He likes to label it as erogoro nonsenso, which means erotic, grotesque nonsense.
Okay.
So basically, I was in love with his prose. I think he's the best writer in this genre after Edgar Allan Poe. Of course, we have H.P. Lovecraft, and we have so many other writers who try, you know, to mimic Edgar Allan Poe, but nobody could come as near to Edgar Allan Poe as Edogawa Rampo, and he really deserved the similar name. I translated it from English. There is a misconception that I translated it from Japanese. No, my Japanese isn't that good.
But you can you have
I
some words
I
now
have
I see, and
I
very
have
good
I have taken a couple of courses back in the day when I was younger. Right now I'm not as smart, so there is no way I can you know, continue learning it. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. So those are the published works that you have, but you also have these small histories
Mm, mm.
How can we find them? How can we see you? How can we read you? How can we reach you?
If I understand you correctly, and I'm not sure I understand you, but I'll answer anyways.
Okay.
As I told you before, or as I told you before we started,
Yeah.
that I do publish my work in various newspapers,
Yes.
and usually مجلة الدوحة, which is the Doha magazine, and then I try to compile them into books. There is no way you can reach my works unless you are very, very good at going and targeting older issues, which is really hard, of newspapers. You understand, if one book is equivalent to 60 newspapers maybe.
Okay.
Sometimes, you know, a story is very long, they will cut it into 2 or 3. I'm very, very fortunate, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank جريدة الوطن newspaper, and مجلة الدوحة magazine, for giving me enough respect to take my work, even if it is a little longer than their specifications. They would cut it into 2, 3 issues, and I'm really thankful to them. Of course, I'm thankful to the Ministry of Culture for supporting me up to this point. Without them, I don't think I would ever have reached anywhere. So you can easily, if you read some of the works, you will understand that what I'm doing. If you read a book, if you read a small little you know, short story by Mark Twain, you understand this guy is working now on the second part or the third part of Mark Twain. You will read some work of Edogawa Rampo, translated by myself. You will understand that I'm translating, you know, some works of Edogawa Rampo. And by the way, I translated most of the work that is available in English, which is not much, but back in the day. Maybe 2 books were issued after I translated it. French is a much better medium for Japanese literature. You will find more, but my French isn't really that good.
Another
Recently,
language. If you are home, be writing a list of all the languages that Dr. Khalifa speaks.
yeah, but I start but never finish. That's one bad thing. Okay. You'll notice recently, if you have read, and I'm not that paranoid, I don't think people are following me.
For sure.
But you'll notice that the short stories that I'm writing, that I'm translating recently, are very, how can I say, heterogeneous. They are not the same. I mean, not written by the same person. They are very recent, 1950 up to 2000s. 1950 is too recent for me, for my taste. I'd like to go to 1920s, to 1880s, and so on and so forth, because that's the sort of literature that I grew up reading. When I grew up reading the books, the translators of the 60s. Translators of the 60s in Egypt and Lebanon used to translate books that were, you know, before the 60s, 1940 and so on and so forth. So as I was saying, and I like, you know, to move around when I talk, you'll see one story called Memento Mori. Doesn't ring a bell? Okay. Another story. Yes.
No.
Nobel. Okay.
Okay.
Another story called The Fly.
Okay.
It doesn't ring a bell. Okay. A third story called The Curious History of Benjamin Button.
Okay.
It doesn't ring a bell.
It does.
Why?
Because it has a movie.
Exactly. Exactly. Very good. So, and one other book called, oh my God, I can't remember. It's a very long title. It's called Super Toys Last All Summer. And there is a reason I can't remember this, but the movie counterpart of it was called AI.
Okay.
The movie counterpart of Memento Mori is Memento, and it was directed by Christopher Nolan.
Okay.
You know Christopher Nolan from Batman and so on and
Yeah.
so forth. Memento Mori was his first book. What I'm trying to do right now is a compilation, an anthology of movies that I loved.
Okay.
And I would go to the original source, a movie. So my criteria is a movie that I loved, and there is a original short story that it was based on. I was successful in translating 6 or 7 up to now. Once I hit 15, I will make it into a compilation.
Okay, and can you give us a little hint about which are the movies or?
I was very surprised to see that most of the books that I translated, most of the short stories, sorry, that I translated were all within the macabre, something similar to what Edgar Allan Poe writes, because he's the originator of this, fantasy, imagination, mostly science fiction. And I was surprised that I like science fiction. I didn't think I liked science fiction, but not the space opera type where you have, you know, a spaceship and go in space and whatnot. There is hardly any mention of space. It's more of the psychological advancement. For instance, Memento Mori is about a person who lost his memory, and he has a short period of time.
Okay.
The story is brilliant, and the movie is more brilliant. They are different, by the way. The story is written by Jonathan Nolan, and the movie was done by Christopher Nolan. They are brothers.
Ah, really?
They are, yeah. You know Benjamin Button. Benjamin Button started as an old person and then died a baby.
Yeah,
So
okay.
the ideas, these strange ideas are what attract me into writing. I don't like writing, you know, for instance, you would never find me translating Anton Chekhov. Of course, I don't know Russian, and not a word, maybe one word or two. But, you know, I could always translate from, a median language, English. But you would never see me translating Russian, Maxim Gorky or Fyodor Dostoevsky or whoever. I like to read them, but I don't think I can invest the time in doing them. Basically, these types of literature, they have many people who want to translate them. My type of literature, very few people like to translate them. Many people look down on them. They think they are, you know, for young, how can I say, adolescents and so on and so forth. And the type of literature that I translate is mostly dead. Nobody writes this type anymore, to my knowledge at least. And I don't really read, you know, recent works that much. I read whatever, you know, comes to my hand. At the moment, I'm reading Don Quixote for the maybe fourth time. I like to read it in several translations, English, Arabic, of course. There is no way I don't know Spanish. There is no way I would understand the Spanish of Miguel de Cervantes.
Even for me it's really hard because
Yeah.
I'm Mexican,
Yeah.
so reading him in Spanish from Spain,
Yeah.
it's hard.
It's old. It's very old. It's
Yeah.
1700 type of language.
Yeah. So we are running out of time, and I know, Doctor, that we could be here 5 hours with you speaking about literature, but I want to ask you for a favor, not only for me, but for the people that are watching us
Go ahead.
right now. What would be your advice for all the people that want to get involved in literature, that want to get involved in translation, or that want to be an academic in any way? Can you give us, please, an
Okay.
advice?
Now I'm going to use this teacher in me. Would you trust a driver who has taken his license recently to drive you?
It will be a little hard.
Very hard, right?
Yeah.
Maybe 10%. If you don't read, there is no way you can write, and there is no way you can translate. You have to pick two languages, most probably your mother tongue,
Yeah.
in your case Spanish, in my case Arabic. You have to read a lot. You have to be able to write very good verses. Another thing, maybe reading poetry, even though I don't like poetry at all. But you know, poetry has this beautiful romantic type of writing. It teaches you to write, whether I like it or not. You have to pick another language, most probably a language that is not your mother tongue, and you really need to read in it. If you don't read on it, you can always, you know, open a book and open a dictionary and check all the different types and do combinations and so on and so forth, and come up with a Google Translate type of literature. But people will read it and will laugh,
Of course.
right?
Of course.
If you can't, master, let's not say master, but at least, you know, have a working familiarity with the language that you are translating from, in my case, English, or you don't have a good mastery, a better mastery of your mother tongue, it would be really hard for you to translate. So translation is not the first step. First step is to read. Maybe second step is to write. Third step would be to translate. And I have a number of examples of ancient translators who how can I say, who actually contradict what I said, but at least they know the language they are translating from.
Okay.
Yeah,
Doctor, thank you so much for your time.
you're welcome.
And last, before we finish, I'm sorry. Is there a way the people that are watching the video right now can contact you? Let's say social media or
I'm away from social media for some reason, completely away from social media, but I'm in Qatar University. They can come to my office and they can drink coffee and they can have half an hour with me if they wish.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you so much
You're
for your
welcome.
time today, and see you soon. شكرا جزيلا.